What's going on in Gaza at the moment? Has fighting crawled to a snail's pace due to politics, or is massive Israeli pressure forcing Hamas concessions? Hi, I'm Hanan Lischinsky. Welcome to another All Israel update, where today we're once again going to try to figure out what really is going on in the Gaza Strip. A change of tactics in recent weeks has really caused some confusion, with two main narratives forming. One, that there is nothing going on in the Gaza Strip at the moment. The military and the government are just dragging out the fighting for political reasons, trying to argue that there are great advances being won, that there are great successes while nothing is really going on. And on the other hand, the government and some people in the army are arguing that there has been a shift in strategy, that the army is now acting differently than it did before, and that we are really on the cusp of seeing the results of this new strategy. And so we'll try to go into this whole story, try to figure out what's really going on. So what we are talking about at the moment in the Gaza Strip is what the Israeli military is calling Operation Sword and Strength. Now, this operation started around a month ago on March 18th with a massive surprise wave of airstrikes after several months of quiet, of ceasefire, and of Hamas releasing the hostages. However, once Hamas stopped releasing the hostages and negotiations between Hamas and Israel for a continuation broke down, the Israeli government, the relatively new Defense Minister Israel Katz, the relatively new IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir, they decided on this massive wave of airstrikes, surprise airstrikes, and a new limited ground operation. And what happened in the first week, it still continues, but it mainly was focused on the first weeks, was that these airstrikes really targeted senior Hamas administrative figures, political leaders, members of its Politburo, but only mid-level military commanders, because many of these military commanders, the high-ranking ones, are either dead or in deep hiding and haven't been heard or seen in months, if not years at this point. Now, the Israeli government, Defense Minister Katz, the new IDF leadership, what they're arguing, what they're explaining to the public that is happening in Gaza is a shift in strategy. Defense Minister Katz just yesterday said that there will be no more raids. So the overall strategy from the start of the war was massive Israeli raids into certain neighborhoods, massive numbers, firepower went in, killed many Hamas fighters, destroyed infrastructure, but then left, and thus enabled Hamas to go back and restore its power in these areas, with the result that some areas have now been raided 3-4 times already over the past 1.5 years. Katz says that this is now over, and the new strategy is to go in very slowly, take over territory and hold it, adding it to the security buffer zone and providing more security. At the moment, it's not clear if this is a de facto annexation, or what the government is really arguing is that this will create pressure on Hamas, with the overall goal of all of these operations at the moment being to pressure Hamas into agreeing to a new ceasefire, and most importantly, a hostage deal, releasing more of the around 24 hostages that are estimated to still be alive. So with this being the goal, as I said, the tool to get there, the method to get there, is to take over territory. IDF estimates that some 30% of the Gaza Strip is now in Israeli control, as well as continuing the stop of any kind of aid, humanitarian aid, that enters the Gaza Strip. And this, the government and the military are arguing, this creates pressure on Hamas, because Hamas now cannot steal the humanitarian aid, cannot take control of the humanitarian aid that enters the Gaza Strip, and in this way can't pressure its population, doesn't have a leverage against its population. And they're arguing that what we're seeing now, the still continuing protests against Hamas, several instances where Hamas police officers have now been killed by local clans in the Gaza Strip, that there are signs that Hamas's hold on power, hold on the population in the Gaza Strip is really starting to break down. However, the goal that really has been described as the overall aim of all of this operation is the return of more hostages, the return of Hamas to a ceasefire and hostage deal. And there have been several reports in recent days that this might be close, and then that Hamas has rejected this. At the moment, Israel is still awaiting an official response. We're filming this on Thursday around noon, and we'll see if this really bears any fruit. But this, of course, opens the space for the critics of the government to say there hasn't been any result yet. It's been over a month, and the hostages continue to suffer in captivity. And so if we're looking at the side of the critics of the government, it's much of what I said already. The hostages are continuing to suffer. Many of the hostage families, as well as hostages that were released in previous hostage deals, have come out from the beginning against the resumption of war. And many in the, let's say, the leaders of this protest movement, that isn't to say, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that half of the Israelis really want to stop the war or pay any price, including the stopping of the war, in order to get the hostages out. But the leaders of this protest movement, this is what they're saying. Stop the war. They are demanding the government to agree to any kind of deal that would release all of the hostages, even at the price of stopping the war and withdrawing all of the IDF troops from the Gaza Strip, effectively returning to the status quo from before the war at the price or in exchange for getting all of the hostages back. Now, another argument of this protest movement that has somewhat merged with the anti-Netanyahu, anti-government protest movements from before the war, another one of their arguments is that Netanyahu and the government are dragging out the war for political reasons, in order to stay in power, in order to be able to continue arguing that a big state-level inquiry into October 7 should happen after the war. And what I mentioned earlier, the arguments of the military, of course, kind of help this argument persist. Before the resumption of the fighting, there were many reports, and since then there have been many reports that the IDF is in fact preparing a plan to take over the Gaza Strip in one fell swoop, put in 3, 4, 5 divisions, just capture the whole area in one go. And this hasn't happened, and it's been over a month and a half of these reports now, and the government is arguing, as I mentioned, that their aim at the moment is pressure Hamas into another agreement, and that is why the fighting has been slow. That is why there have been barely any Hamas fighters actually been killed in the around a month of fighting. But on the other hand, this of course enables the critics to say that the fighting is being dragged out without any results, because the hostages are still there. Barely any Hamas fighters have been killed, and reserves meanwhile are still being called up. Reserves are still being tired out. They're away from their families. So this situation kind of continues without any tangible results that the government can show at the moment. And so if we're trying to get to a conclusion here, the main question that I sought to answer was what's going on in the Gaza Strip. And I think both sides are right in a way. As the critics are arguing, the fighting really is at a snail's pace. The fighting really is low intensity. Airstrikes are going on, but less than before. Hamas fighters are still being killed, but at a very low rate compared to the earlier months of fighting. But that is because the government and the IDF brass really decided on a change of strategy. They are advancing very slowly, deliberately. They are continuing to do search and destroy infrastructure. There are still now estimates coming out that only a fourth of all of the tunnels in Gaza have been destroyed. So there is still a lot of work to be done. And that's what I think is going on. It's a very deliberate, very slow pace, with the goal really being to pressure Hamas into agreeing to another hostage deal and release the hostages before maybe eventually the government will decide to execute its plans for a big offensive that really would take over all of the Gaza Strip in one fell swoop, and so on and so on. However, it's important to mention one thing. We're once again in the shadow of dramatic reports that came out today that Israel was about to strike Iran possibly as early as next month, and negotiations are now going on between the US and Iran over its nuclear program. So it's very likely, in my opinion, that the Israeli government has decided on this slow course, even at the price of the suffering, the continued suffering of the hostages. It's important to note that even if you agree with the government, as many are doing here in Israel, we never forget the suffering of the hostages that is still going on. But I think that the Iran issue is a very important factor in really causing the government to pursue this strategy now, trying to pressure Hamas into another ceasefire, and seeing really where the Iran issue is going before deciding on another major offensive in the Gaza Strip. And the Israeli governments, all Israeli governments throughout its history, have always sought to focus on one front and never to enter two-front wars, which is also something that we saw with Gaza and Lebanon over the past year and a half of war. So as you can see, despite the spring weather here, despite the Pesach holiday, the war is still continuing. It's at low intensity at the moment, but as I said, hostages continue to suffer. The country really continues to suffer. And we'll have to see how things develop. If you want to read more information, more analysis, and a deeper explanation of what's going on in Israel and the greater region, visit us at allisrael.com. Leave a like under this video, and continue to follow us here on YouTube and all the other social media channels.